Alrighty guys, so for number one, we have that the following data show the heights in meters of 6 players in a basketball team. So the first player has a height of 1.67 meters, the second player has a height of 1.6, and the last player has a height of 2.19 meters. And so for part A, for these 6 players, you need to find the mean height, the median, the modal, and the range. Now all of this is very, very easy, but what we might be confused about is what each thing means. So once we understand what each thing means, this will turn out to be much easier than expected. So for part AI, we need to recall that mean is the same as average. They are synonyms. And for the formula for mean, well, you should go to your formula booklet. Ladies and gentlemen, the day of the test, you're walking in with just a couple tools, your pen, your pencil, your eraser, your calculator, 2 years of experience of this thing called Aiii, 2 hours of sleep, and the formula booklet. So get familiar with the formula booklet. It will help you do better the day of the test. So once you get familiar with it, you read the word mean, you recall that it's average, and you remember that it's in your formula booklet. You open up the formula booklet and you find it eventually right over here. And so for mean, it's X with the little bar on top, ¿cierto? Which is actually a good reminder that in my calculator, it's going to show up with an X on a bar on top if I ever have to use it. And secondly, although this looks absolutely nasty, if you remember it as average, intuitively what you will eventually find is that this number up top is basically like your total of your data. So total data, right? Sum of total data divided by this n, this n, which is, that's going to be like your total data, but in terms of like amount. See? Now I know this isn't like the fancy math definition. I know this isn't like the textbook definition, but for me, intuitively, I like to remember that whatever's on top for mean is going to be the sum of my data, while down at the bottom is going to be the total data in the sense of an amount. What do I mean by this? If up top is going to be the sum, then for the median height, it's going to be 1.67, which is this first person, plus 1.60, which is the second person, plus 1.68, plus 2.31, plus 2.31, plus 2.19. So in that sense, I am having the sum of the total of my data up top divided by the total amount of my data. And when I say amount, again, it's not like the most fancy explanation, but for me, intuitively makes a lot of sense. What is the amount of my data? Well, I have 6 players in my data, so that's my amount. See? So in that sense, I'm saying amount, and in that sense, I'm saying sum. And here's a good point, you guys. In math and in life in general, there are a lot of different concepts that will be taught to you, okay? And you have to find a way that you remember it best. See? Maybe you're listening to this guy on YouTube saying, total amount, and you don't like it that I'm saying total amount. Maybe you remember it in a different way, ¿cierto? Maybe for you, it's more intuitive to say sum divided by total. Maybe for you that makes more sense. For me, this makes more sense, okay? To each their own, find a way to remember it. At the end of the day, this is how you solve it. You find whatever floats your boat. So you pull out your calculator, and because we're dealing with a big fraction, you can go alpha y equals, press the first one, that pops up a fraction. This is just for plugging in more easily so that we don't mess up any parentheses and stuff like that. Add up carefully because these are easy points. You can only mess it up by plugging it in correctly. Double check. Looks fine to me. Divided by 6. So for part AI, this is my method. I'm showing my method. And my answer is 1.96. Don't forget the units, meters. So that is for part AI. For part AII, we have the median height. And so for the median height, this will be a little bit different. But for median, all you really need to do, or what I like to do, is that median, I can associate it to like the middle. Okay, so mean we will associate to average, median we will associate to middle. So it's the middle of my data. Now, if I ask you, what is the middle of my data in this scenario, there is one big observation we have to do, and that is that if you think about the middle of your data from here, well, this number is bigger than that number. So for the median, they have to be important in order. And so if I were to put these numbers in order from lowest to greatest, what I would end up with clearly is that my smallest number is 1.60. Then my next highest is 1.67. My next highest is 1.68. Then I have the 2.19. And then I have two 2.31s. In that sense, now I have my data organized from lowest to highest. Now it is in order, see? And so the middle of my data now, well, which one is it? Well, let's try to find the middle from here. If I take one off from each end, so one off here and one off there, I'm still not at the middle. If I take one off here and one off here, I'm still not at the middle. And notice, if I take one off here and one off here, it's like you end up with no middle, ¿cierto? So, important observation. Following this visual sort of approach of the green lines of like subtracting one on each end until you reach the middle, what you discover is that for even scenarios in the sense that you have 6 players, so 6 is your total, right? Your total amount of your data, and it's an even number. So whenever it's an even number, you will encounter this problem where you sort of have like 2 medians. What happens here, ¿cierto? It's not that you have 2 medians, it's that your median is between both. And so if your median is between both, what you actually have to do is take the 1.68, add it to the 2.19, divide that by 2, and there is your median. So what is between the two sort of middles, if you want to think about it that way, is you add both, divide by 2. Your median here is 1.935 meters. So for part Aiii, for the median, we have 1.935 meters. And just to show like the classic example, if we were in a scenario where our numbers were odd, for example, you have the data, I don't know, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and I ask you what is the median here, if you do the same exercise of cutting one off on each end again and again, you do end up with a single median. See, it's just that whenever your data is what I'm gonna call it even, so for example, the same scenario, just that now instead of having 5 pieces of data, so it's odd, we now have 6 pieces of data, so it's even. We encounter the same issues down here, because whenever your data is even, you sort of end up with like 2 medians, but you can't answer 2 medians. So you gotta take the 2 numbers in the middle, do 5 plus 7 divided by 2. In this scenario, it would be 12 divided by 2 equals 6. See? So a little bit of a longer explanation of how the median works, but now that you saw this, you never have to see it again. Isn't that nice about school? Anyways, that is for part Aiii. For part Aiii, we need to find the model height. And so what I like to associate the word model to is the word most. So that's the first observation we're going to do. For part Aiii, we have that the model, or a lot of times you're going to see it called as the mode. Okay, I've also seen it as mode. We will associate it as the word most. So notice, in all these different scenarios, I am associating like a more intuitive definition, see? So mean, we will associate it to average, which in consequence makes you associate it to either this or this. Median, we will associate it to middle, okay? And then you remember the visual aspect of solving it. And the model or the mode, you will associate it to the word most. And so the model height in this case is the height, quite literally, that shows up the most. And so which height shows up the most? We'll take a good look. The 1.60, does it show up again? Nuh-uh, you only have one 1.60. The 1.67, does it show up again? You have a 1.68, which is really close, but it's still not 1.67. So 1.67 shows up also only once. 1.68 shows up only once. 2.19 shows up only once. And ta-da! 2.31 shows up once here and once here. So 2.31 actually shows up twice. And so the model height, the height that shows up the most, is indeed 2.31. It shows up twice, while every single other one shows up only once. So for part Aiii, the height that shows up the most is 2.31 meters. All right? And just so that we're on the same page, my answers thus far has been this, this, and this. And now for part AI4 or whatever, see, we have the range of heights, see? And now for the range of heights, I don't have like a more intuitive word to put here because range is already like pretty intuitive, see? So sometimes when we talk about like our range of options, it's all of your options, see? If you talk about the range of how far maybe a gun can reach, ¿cierto? It is from here to there. So it has a certain sort of interval. The range we will associate it to, I don't have an intuitive word for it, but the procedure is basically just max minus min. Okay? Maybe remembering the examples I mentioned can be good. When we talk about a range of options, you're talking about all your options. And so if you're talking about all your options, you got to do the max minus the min. And so in this case, the maximum value here, the highest, is 2.31. While the lowest is 1.60. So for the range, it's quite simply, we will associate range to max minus min. And in this scenario, we have the 2.31 minus the 1.60. So 2.31 minus 1.60 will be giving me my final answer, which will be in pink. My final answer should be, I'm pretty sure I can do mental math here, but you know, we have a calculator, so why not? And let's be honest, all of us the day of the test, we put into the calculator even something like 10 minus 5. See? So, following that energy, over here the range is going to be 0.71 meters. And just so that you guys believe this guy that's online, not that you should believe guys that are online, but just so I gain your trust for this video, see? Over here, we have the answer key, see? So there you go, 1.96. Important to show your method. In this case, it wasn't so important, but it's important to do it. Whatever, show your method. See, 1.935 meters is what we got over there. The 2.31 for part Aiii, and then here's the procedure, the method for finding the range, and there's the answer, 0.71. See, yeah. Last but not least, we are moving on to part B, and so for part B, what they actually tell us is that a new player. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that. Jorge? George? Whatever. A new player, George of the Jungle, joins the team. Their height is measured as 1.98 meters to the nearest centimeter. And so for part B, this is a classic, by the way. I've noticed that IB really likes to ask these sort of questions now. You need to write down the shortest possible height of George. Okay? So, his height right now is 1.98 meters, right? And notice, when they tell you, this is the key idea. When they tell you that his height is measured as 1.98 meters, blah, 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 to the nearest centimeter, that means that through rounding, you have to be able to reach 1.98 meters. And so, maybe let's do like a different example, see? Before we do the 1.98. So, if I tell you that through rounding, I reached, for example, the number, whatever, like 40. See, so if through rounding I reach the number 40, that means I could have had as a highest value 44 that ended up as 40, or I could have had 35 which ended up as 40. Because 35, you look at the 5, you say, it's 5 or above, you round it up, you end up with 40, ¿cierto? Or for the 44, you say, it's below 5, so you round it down, you end up with the 40. So, in this case, what you have is 1.98. And so, technically, through rounding, I could have had the number 1.984. Because the moment that it's 1.985, you end up rounding it up. You end up quite literally rounding it upwards. See? So from like the upper end, or so to say, it has to be 1.984. Because if this is 5, you end up with 1.99. Okay, that's what this guy's saying. See? And from the lower end, ¿cierto? From the 35 to the 40, from the lower end, what you actually end up with is the number 1.9, and here you do have to do a little bit of critical thinking, 75. So if you have 1.975, it's 5, so you round it upwards, and you end up with 1.98. So this is for like the lower bound, if you want to think it this way, the lower end, and this is for the, upper bound, upper end. See? That does not look like the word upper. Let me try again. There you go. See? And so that being said, for part B, we need to write down the shortest possible height for George. And so for the shortest, it's going to be the lower bound. My answer is 1.975. Don't forget the units, meters. Bada bim, bada boom. It is right here. 1.975 meters. See? If they were talking about what is, or write down the highest possible height for George, it would end up being 1.984. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is for number 1. And I think the biggest tip I can give you is that these questions about mean, median, mode, range, this, that, etc., the math is really not that hard. I mean, I think the toughest part for me, at least, is remembering what median means, what mean means, what modal means. And so associating all these little tiny details like median is middle, because median, middle, el medio, ¿cierto? Mode and a model sounds a lot like most, so that can help you remember. Range, that happens more through like examples and stuff, but you still get the max min. And the mean is just a weird one. I don't know how mean ends up as average, but it does. See? So that's one of the few things you do have to sort of memorize, and the other ones you can associate it to terms that are more intuitive. See? Ladies and gentlemen, that is for number 1.